We want to welcome everybody back to the State of Our World. And today we have somebody with us. This is Todd that's with us today in our discussion. And to talk about what our discussion is, last time we talked about the one world government and various things that might bring about one world government. And at the top of the list, note that there are 50 different organizations that I found that are pushing for one world government. And at the top of the list is climate change. So today, we're going to talk about climate change and relate that to the Bible. We may even talk about some of the problems with the solutions to climate change. So we'll get started.
Well, Ellen, I think this is a very big topic. You hear about it almost every day in the news, at least in some part. So, do you mind if I start off with some questions?
Go ahead. That's
okay.
What you got there.
So, let's talk about the issue of global warming. You've heard about that. We hear about that, and we hear that things are getting warmer. But is there any evidence of global warming?
Yeah, evidence of global warming. Well, I think scientists are pretty clear on the idea that at least in the northern hemisphere we have a lot of global warming. I've even looked at Australia, and Australia talks about it too.
Okay.
So it is an interesting subject. They used to call it global warming. Up until, well, after about the year 2000, things changed a little bit because between about 1998 and 2012, they didn't notice any warming. So then they switched it to climate change.
Interesting. Yeah. Things weren't getting warm enough, maybe?
Well, I think they have seen it a little bit in the past few years. Yeah. And we do see melting going on in the glaciers, especially around Alaska. You know, it's kind of interesting. I go up to Alaska once in a while. We were talking about that. And my son says, oh, yeah, I see these bumper stickers that say, Alaskans for global warming. They're looking for a little warmer climate up there.
Yeah, especially in the wintertime when it's negative temps.
And Fairbanks, where it gets down to minus 60. So, yeah, but they're concerned about the glaciers melting also.
Okay. So what about that? I mean, are there data points that point to, a history of trends of global warming? Have we seen that? Can we believe that?
Yeah, and we're going to get into that today. We're going to be talking about trends over time.
Okay.
How far back do they go? And there's been warming, there's been cooling, there's been ice ages. Alaska had 3 ice ages, they say. So I'll take a look at those. What's happening today? We are in a warming trend, according to science. And so NASA kind of follows this. I have a quote that says, according to ongoing temperature analysis led by scientists at NASA's Goddard Institute for Science, it says the average global temperature on Earth has increased by at least 1.1 degrees Celsius since 1880. And the majority of the warming has occurred since 1975. Of course, it's about 1970 that they really had a push to control the climate.
So my question back to that data point is, at what is it consistent? Is it at the same place, or is this an average, or it's a very good question, isn't it?
Yeah. It's Europe and the United States that are really pushing this mostly.
Okay.
And we do have temperature, monitoring in those places, but all over the world they are taking some temperatures. The question is, are they consistent about where they're getting the temperatures from? And they take ocean temperatures too. Surface, down deep, and they're talking about the ocean warming.
Yeah, in fact, that was just a news story this week about ocean temperatures down in Florida being over 100 degrees.
Yeah.
Interesting enough.
Yeah, well, you have to ask yourself, how far down in the water did they go, and was it above black
Right.
sand? We don't know. I would assume it's where the people are swimming, that it's that temperature.
That they notice, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, is there another data point?
Well, we're going to get into this later, too,
Okay.
that there have been warm periods in the Earth's history, as warm as now. And I could go back and discuss it. You know, if you go back far enough, you find that on the Antarctic and up north, they had warm temperatures at one time. They say that the Antarctic may have had forests with all kinds of animals. I even read one place where they had rainforest in the Antarctic. I was up in Fairbanks, like I mentioned, and went to the museum there at Fairbanks at the university, and it showed animals like African lions. They called them cave lions or something else, but they looked exactly like the African lion. And some of these animals that were in the northern areas, you say, wow, the Earth's climate in the past must have been much different.
Of course, we would probably attribute a lot of that as Christians to the flood, to the days before the flood as well. And so who knows what we're just now uncovering.
Yeah, and we don't, was the Earth perfectly vertical or perpendicular to the sun at one time?
Yeah, good point, yeah.
We had a tsunami in Asia, and it tilted the Earth slightly. A little bit more than it is. Very slightly, but it was noted by the GPS satellites and everything. They noticed that it tilted the Earth. So if you did have a global flood, how far could it have tilted the Earth? Maybe the climate was much different. We'll discuss that a little bit later.
Okay. I've got another question, Alan. So there's an organization called the WHO, the World Health Organization, I believe, and they speak about the dangers of climate change. My question is, what are they saying, and who is behind the WHO? I almost said who. Who is behind the who?
Yeah. WHO is concerned about the climate change, but they are also concerned about health issues. Now, if you look into it, it looks like we have other organizations, with about 50 organizations that want to bring the world together in one government, and the WHO is one of them. So they say that a lot of things could be affected in the Earth, not just health. I'll throw up a slide I'm looking at that talks about the temperatures of the Earth over a long period of time, and this goes back to early 1600s, when we had the what do you call it, ice age. There was an ice age about the time of Martin Luther and those around 500 years ago. They called it the Little Ice Age.
Oh, the little, okay, yeah.
And things were cool at that time, and it has been warming ever since. But not as much as some people would think. If you look at this chart, it shows winter temperatures, it shows summer temperatures, and down at the bottom it shows volcanic eruptions, how they affected the climate, and up at the top, solar spots, and we'll talk a little bit about that. What about solar flares and stuff like that? We'll talk about that later. But looking at these charts, here's one that came from England, central England, ever since that same time period up until today. And you will see that possibly towards the very, very end there's a slight increase, but there have been ups and downs and ups and downs, a slow warming ever since about 1500 till today, with, of course, little ups and downs. Winter, summer,
Yeah.
and then we get some warm years, we get some cool years.
Well, I was just going to talk to that point alone. So I grew up on a farm back in North Dakota, and we had, series of warmer summers and then not so warm summers, and then moisture and that type of thing. But it usually tended to follow a period, or a serial or a series of seasonal, where it would where it would come back and then it would go away. And so, especially in the Midwest, you'd hear of the blizzard of '66, which had, 20 some feet of snow, 10 to 20 feet of snow, and then not so much for another 10 to 20 years.
Are you talking about 1966?
1966, yeah, way back.
Yes, I remember when I was young, that was probably around 56, and we hit temperatures of 60 below zero in western Montana.
Yeah.
It hasn't been that way for a while. Some scientists have even predicted that there will be another ice age coming within the next 100 years. They say, well, we'll have another ice age. So is it, and others say, no, it won't be a bad ice age because we've had global warming, over time in the last several years.
Mm-hmm.
But, so they're arguing back and forth, and it's all, how would you say it, theory. Nobody knows.
Exactly.
In fact, nobody really knows what took place thousands of years ago. Nobody was there.
That's right.
And so they have a hypothesis. Well, we see this evidence, we see that evidence. We think it was caused at such and such a time. We think it was caused by this. Maybe the dinosaurs were destroyed by an asteroid from outer space. Maybe it came off of Jupiter. That we hear that. So, but those are what you would call theories. And science likes to prove everything in a laboratory and test it several times, but you can't test these things.
Right. So I want to get back to the WHO. There's a list of items that they are very concerned about, that affect the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, do you want to talk through those points a little bit?
Yeah. I'd like to finish, first of all,
Okay.
with these temperatures.
Sure.
During the Dark Ages, I have a slide I'm looking at where during the Dark Ages, the temperatures were as high as they are now. And then they went down, down, down till about 1600, and then started back up again. And what went on in the Antarctic was pretty stable. Still today, we have, the Antarctic has quite a bit of ice. It's pretty stable.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another picture I'm showing of the Little Ice Age, where it had very low temperatures, but the medieval times, back around 1000 AD, 1100 AD, it got pretty warm. The Earth was pretty warm. So what I'm saying is it comes and goes, it comes and goes. Now, the World Health Organization says that today there is an emergency. It said, and I'm quoting, "Climate change is the single biggest health threat facing humanity. The health professionals worldwide are already responding to the health harms caused by this unfolding crisis." So I see the World Health Organization going along with many of these other organizations that say we got to get together, get all the nations together and have one world government to control what's happening, because there are greenhouse gases building up. And a lot of these greenhouse gases are being built up by countries that we do not have control over.
Right.
You're going to China and Asia and even Russia. What are you going to do? And they're saying, well, that is the biggest problem with bringing all the world together, is that we have countries that are not willing to give up control.
Control is a big issue, especially in the name of the environment, right?
Yeah. And,
So-
and the WHO, the World Health Organization, says there's a list of things they say the environment will affect.
Did you want me to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah,
Okay.
you have that list?
I do have it in front of me. So they talk about these are items that affect the environment. Of course, the atmosphere, disease, food scarcity, heat deaths, mass displacement. They're talking about refugees, you know, with that.
Millions recently have moved, yes.
In fact, an average of 20 million people are forcibly displaced to other areas. 20 million.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
At least 3.5 million came to the United States recently.
We were talking before here just about mass extinction due to a maybe out of this world experience like a asteroid that would come and hit the atmosphere and what that could cause. Extreme weather events, we've seen that too. One recently that I think about quite a bit is how on Mammoth, over by Mammoth's area, that we got over 900 inches of snow.
Mammoth Lakes, California?
California.
Yeah, I was down there after that, and the guys were out skiing with just shorts on and no shirt on and skiing down the mountain. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact,
still snow there.
There's still snow there, and they're skiing into August. So that's different, right? So that's extreme weather events. Sea level rise, probably from, you know, the melting of the polar ice caps.
Yeah, they say that in the last couple hundred years, it's come up 4 inches on sea level.
The list goes on. Water scarcity. Currently, where we live, it's pretty dry. Hasn't rained in a very long time, and a lot of, you know, sometimes wells start to go drier, and so that's another item. Ocean acidification. I think I said that right.
Acid rain and acid in the ocean.
Yeah.
That comes from what they call the greenhouse gases being rained upon and coming back down to the earth. Yeah.
And then there's the complete shutdown of ocean currents. I found that interesting once, that the currents that flow, you know, from Antarctica affect the world's atmospheres, basically, and there's these flows throughout the oceans, right?
The weather. In fact, we might bring this out now, that all weather on the planet is caused by unequal heating from the sun. All of our weather. You get a hot spot, the air rises, that creates a low pressure area. Air moves in from the higher pressure areas, creates what we call wind.
Yeah.
This takes place out on the ocean too, and the wind causes the ocean currents. They drag the ocean currents, and those ocean currents move around and change, and that affects our weather here. We have what we call, warm seasons, El Nino seasons, and then we have La Nina. The colder ones,
right.
And they go up and down depending upon those ocean currents. And you get a spot out there where the sun is hitting more. It's going to cause a low pressure or pull the currents up from Hawaii or so forth, and that's going to change our weather. So there's a difference between weather and climate.
Yeah. All I can say is we have an amazing creator that created all this. You know.
Yeah.
Societal collapses.
Yeah.
That's another one.
Okay.
Is there recent examples that you think about?
Well, a society would collapse if the whole area turned into a desert, for example. Everybody's going to move out. And if you have disease, like they had during the Dark Ages, that could cause a society to collapse. People just leave. I actually moved into a town one time where they had a disease like the Black Plague. That was in South America. They called it fiebre hemorrhagica. And it killed a third of the people in the town.
Wow.
And so you can imagine the exodus out of that town.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a society can collapse.
And then the last one is war.
Yes.
We're seeing, I think the war that we think about quite a bit, it's on the news, is the Ukraine-Russia war.
Yeah, and what happens too there is that a society, if they need food and they're not getting food at the price they want, or they're not getting the resources that they want. This happened during World War II, where Japan wanted resources from other places, and like Germany too. So they went after those resources. War. And that brought about changes in the way the world is governed, brought about the United Nations. It brought about we have people today in the United Nations that are trying to unite the world. There are organizations there too, trying to unite everybody together.
Yeah.
It brought about the European Union. And so it's bringing people together, and you get big organizations like the European Union fighting another, like China. You're talking about a nuclear war. And that is a big worry today. Talk about climate change. Wow.
Yeah, I just heard kind of that headline as well, that they're shifting around nuclear arsenals, in the Ukraine region, at least Russia is, and using that as cyber rattling,
Yeah.
So, and by the way, I think it's interesting that the Ukraine is really the breadbasket of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And so is it any wonder that those resources are being fought after, and we just pray for those people.
And if there was climate change and all of that fell apart, well, let's say Russia has a problem.
Yeah.
They're going to go after the food somehow.
Absolutely. So what does the UN, the United Nations, say about climate change?
Yeah, there was somebody in the United Nations, it was Antonio Gutierrez. He says something about climate change. And he says, we only have about 10 years to stop the catastrophe. And you've heard that on the news too. We only have 10 years. This is a catastrophe and we have 10 years. I think what they're trying to do, and you'll notice that the news talks about weather, they'll talk about the threat of nuclear war, and they talk about climate change and the temperatures, the heat, everything going on. This is just terrible. Down in Phoenix, you got temperatures over 110. Well, I used to work construction a little while in Phoenix, and it was 118.
Yeah, right.
So, but they're concerned about the length of time that it's been that. But their temperatures have been up and down over a long period of time.
I just saw that news story about warning people to going into the desert down in California because of extreme heat conditions. And I believe there's a sign right on the edge with the current temperature, and people still go in.
Yeah, and there have been a few die just recently. Yeah. Anyhow, this fellow there says, Monday's report by the International Panel on Climate Change showed that the world is on a fast track to climate disaster. And the governments and organizations have engaged in a litany of broken climate promises. So they're concerned there that we're not doing enough. The world is going to come to an end because we're just not reacting.
I so much want to get into the reasons for that, but I'm going to resist for a little bit more because I think each government has their own agenda, right?
Yes.
Now, but I want to shift the discussion. What about the young people? Are they concerned about climate change more than the older generations? Have we seen evidence of that in the past?
And I think that's coming through our school system too.
Okay.
And so as they're coming up from the first grade or kindergarten, they're taught to fear the rise in temperature, the climate change. And so when they get a little bit older and they get into college, it's pretty serious by then. And I put a slide up there showing what's going on with some of our students. Students occupy schools and universities across Europe. Europe is big. And if you remember what has been going on over there in the, what do you call them? The art museums.
Yeah, the Louvre.
Where students have gone in there and destroyed art. And they say, this is because we're objecting to the fact that we're not controlling the climate.
Yeah, didn't they took some paint and just kind of put it over, just sprayed it over the paintings?
Yeah.
In response to make awareness of climate change? I'm not sure I got the association with that.
Yeah, why they went after the paintings?
Yeah.
I think they thought that would draw the most attention, get the most attention. It's like you can be out on the street with 1,000 people marching, or you can do this with just 2 or 3 people and get just as much attention. I think that's kind of what they were thinking.
Just vandalize instead, huh?
Yeah.
Oh my. Okay.
Yes.
Surely there could be other ways.
Yeah, but they are concerned. Young people are concerned about this. And if you were to go into a university and try to say otherwise, you would be pushed right off the platform, I'm sure.
Interesting. So tolerance, the question I have is it seems like we are getting more intolerant in time.
Yep.
And are we raising up a generation, I'm not trying to generalize here, but are we raising up more intolerance than tolerance? So
you're saying maybe 10, 15 years down the road, we may see people that are so intolerant they would not put up with somebody passing something on in the internet or going on to Facebook or something and saying something, they would attack them. Yeah, I think we're getting there. Where
people don't engage in a discussion, I'll say it, not a debate, but a discussion, to actually hear what the other side is saying, and would rather resort to, I'll just say, other means, including violence, because they just don't tolerate another opinion.
Yeah, in one of our last meetings we were talking about that, how even governments seem to be getting involved. And we'll have to leave that one for another time.
Yes,
but
we could go off on the side on that.
Yeah.
So here's another question. What past predictions were made? Let's go back in time to the 1970s.
Yeah. Now this is interesting because I lived through that. I was graduating from college about the time this all hit. And
I'm just a little bit younger than you because I still remember the 70s. I was born in the 60s, so just barely.
Okay. Yeah. So I can remember, and I put up some quotes so you can take a look at. One was, this guy was this professor of biology from Stanford, probably a little bit on the edge, but he was saying that in the next few years alone, he says, 200,000 Americans will die in 1973. 200,000 will die from smog disasters in New York and Los Angeles alone. And so their predictions were getting out there.
Yeah.
And he also says that DDT and other chlorinated hydrocarbons were going to bring about this great emergency. And he said people would not live beyond the age of 42 by the year 1980.
Huh. Okay. That seems a little, maybe a little off, but.
Yeah. So he's saying that we're going to get less and less. Actually, we've been going the other way.
What is the average life expectancy?
I think the average life expectancy right now is around 78 and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And more so in different cultures and groups around the world, that have healthy lifestyles.
Some of the Asians live much longer than some Americans do.
Our diet is not what it should be.
Right.
So what about this ecologist, Kenneth Watt?
Yeah. Let's see. Let's get caught up here.
No, that's fine. I have the quote here.
Go ahead, read that.
He said, by the year 2000, if present trends continue, we will be using up crude oil at such a rate that there won't be any more crude oil. Says you'll drive up to the pump and say, fill her up, buddy, and they'll say, I'm sorry, there isn't any. Now, obviously, we're 23 years past 2000, and there's still plenty of crude oil available.
In fact, I was listening to one fella who's talking about the change to get away from using oil entirely.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what he was hoping there, is get away from it.
Yeah.
And they were saying that it may take 100 to 115 years to completely get away from the use of oil and gas. This is to talk about 10 years or 15 years. He says that probably not going to happen.
I kind of smile because you see Teslas, because of range anxiety, people are actually carrying little portable generators in the trunk of the Teslas just to charge the vehicle. And of course, what is actually being burned in those generators are gas.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of ironic.
Yeah,
so
it is. To think that we could completely change things. And we'll get into that. What are the side effects of all this? Did you have another one there?
So, well, it kind of goes along with that about the production of oil.
Yeah.
So oil production last year was at about 95 million barrels per day, which was double the global oil output of 48 million around the time of the first Earth Day in 1970. Double the capacity. So the rate of usage is very high.
Right. Yeah. Well, and we're kind of dependent on oil right now. It's going to take some time. When you think about going entirely to electric cars and solar panels and wind generators, we have some problems.
Yeah. We clearly do. It is going to take a lot of time. I think about just the amount of energy that it would take to, if we converted all the transportation, from shipping as well as commuter traffic, it would, and shifting all that onto the electrical grid, which is not ready for that type of production today.
No, and there are some dangers in this. If you moved everybody to total electric, and then you had a solar flare, a really bad solar flare, worse than the one in 1959, much worse, it would wipe out your grid.
Yeah.
They say it could wipe out the grid clear across the country, and it would take weeks to get it back up. Can you imagine what would happen if everybody was driving electric cars? Right down in California, they can't even charge their cars without having blackouts.
Right.
And they have a very small percentage of the cars that are electric. And they also want to do away with gas generation. They don't want nuclear power plants. And so they're going to have to come up with something. And then there are some other problems too, and that is waste of these. I don't know, you may have had that question written down there.
about batteries.
Yeah, well, that too. But thinking of the the solar panel, the waste on solar panels and wind blades and all that stuff, it's terrible. What do you do with tons and tons, maybe even millions of tons of solar panels? And I was driving through Walla Walla and saw a big pile of these wind generator blades.
Wind turbine blades, yeah.
And they're fiberglass, basically, and carbon fiber. What are you going to do with those? How do you cut those up? They say that we just have to put them in landfill. And there are some harmful elements in the solar panels too. What are you going to do with all of that? You're going to crash that? Some of it's just glass, of course. That's not, and some of it's metal, but there are some harmful elements there. And I heard one guy say, hey, you're going to trade one form of pollution for another form of pollution. Yeah. It might be a trade-off.
And some of those solar panels have been actually deployed now for 10 to 15 years. So the usable life capacity of solar panels is somewhere between 20 and 30 years. So they're coming up where they will have to be recycled in some form. Hopefully they can be recycled.
Yep, you drive by and down in California, out in the desert, there are these big solar farms. And, they say it takes like 250,000 acres or something to produce what a small nuclear plant would produce. It's a large number. So it takes a lot of land, and those solar farms now are needing replacement. And they have to do something with the rubbish.
I think the important point here is we're not talking against electrification. It's just that this takes time, right?
Right.
You can't just switch over a whole country and nation overnight onto another grid or another power source, and really it actually comes down to control, doesn't it? And that is the agenda that is pushed to say, well, and there's some form of that in independence. And so we as Americans have the ability to get into a car, to turn the ignition, and to go anywhere, hundreds of miles on a tank of fuel.
Right.
So today that infrastructure doesn't exist where you can go a great far distance on an electric vehicle. That's the range anxiety that people talk about.
Right. And there are some problems there too. We're not quite to the point we can say we can do everything with an electric vehicle that we can with a car. Like you say, well, I can go 300 miles now on a charge.
Right.
And then you have to get a quick charge, and you may only get 60% on that quick charge. Yeah. And you may have to wait in line. And it may take an hour or two. So there are some problems with traveling long distance, and you have big trucks trying to move heavy shipping crates and all that across the country, and you have ships and you have jets flying, and it's a problem.
We're pretty fortunate in this country that there have been some rolling blackouts, but not in our part of the country, but down in California, because of fires and that they have had to cut the power to not promote, additional fires. Yeah. But I was talking with a missionary from Africa, South Africa, and rolling outages are part of their daily procedure. In fact, there's only a few hours in the very early morning that they even have electricity at all, because the whole countryside doesn't have enough generation for power. Yeah. So how does that support, going to moving transportation as a sector, onto a grid that doesn't even have the capacity.
Right, and lately there have been objections to using gas stoves and gas hot water heaters, and yeah, it is a problem. How are you going to do that when we have had rolling blackouts in California? I lived in California, and we had rolling blackouts and brownouts, and finally they decided we're going to have to build a power plant that's gas operated, you know, burn natural gas. They didn't like to, but they did it. And they were importing electricity from other states and complaining about the high price. So it is a problem. And then they were, at the same time, they were talking about taking down the dams. And recently here, the governor of Washington signed something to remove 3 dams off of the Snake River. And they're generating electricity, of course.
By the way, they don't call them officially renewable energy.
No. But when it got to Washington, Congress said, no, you're not.
Right.
So it stopped. But you know, I had a fellow I knew. He was working on a grid system, the power grid here along the Columbia River, and he said, you know what? There's room to put another generator in this dam, this dam. He says, one of those generators will produce more than all these wind turbines combined.
That's amazing.
Because the wind turbines, one of the problems is they stop a lot.
Yeah.
I fly around a lot in small planes, and go by, and there may be one over here running and one over there, or the rest of them are all stopped. If you get a still time during the winter, they're all stopped. And then there are clouds overhead, and you don't get good charge from solar panels.
That's right.
And so it isn't practical to eliminate things like you know, dams and turbines in the dams, or even maybe nuclear power plants, which are
I think we
clean.
live in a society that just takes things for granted. We go to the tap, we turn the faucet, the water runs. We go to the light switch, we turn it on, and it just lights up. But what happens when some of these things don't work anymore? What will we do? What will society do? I feel that we've kind of lost a lot of the things that our forefathers actually took. They had to take their own initiative to create and to depend upon their local resources, not the grid.
Right. Probably if we had a big solar flare that knocked out the power system, you know, and all the stoplights were down, you couldn't pump gas at the gas stations, traffic was all blocked up, and it stopped everything. In fact, no banking, no internet. The internet would go down.
Yeah.
You could imagine what would happen. I think that we would be in for a lot of violence too at that time.
Especially if people can't feed their families, right?
Yeah. I want to bring one more thing out about those wind turbines. NPR, National Public Radio, mentioned that researchers have established that more than 720,000 tons of blade material has to be disposed of in the next 20 years. And the leases on the land, you put up one of those turbines, it costs about $3 million. And then you're paying, well, if you pay up to $8,000 per turbine to rent the land, that could come to $96,000 a year. You know, so when talking to some of these guys, they say, oh, we can produce electricity a lot cheaper over here at the dam. These wind turbines are very expensive to get electricity.
Sure, and we know that, and we're told that it's really not about the production from the wind turbines, as an example. It's about energy credits, which is another form of currency with companies that generate, you know, electricity and that type of thing. And so it's about trading those energy credits.
Yeah, gotta.
I have a question. Yeah, because
we're running out of time. Yeah,
we are running out of time, and we want to actually go back to the Bible to hear what God talks about climate change. But before we get there, and perhaps it's involved in the same answer here, do we have an obligation to protect the earth and the environment?
Good question. As Christians, we do, don't we?
Yes.
We know that when Adam and Eve were created, they were given that obligation to take care of the earth. So as Christians, we want to take care of the earth. In fact, to be respectful to other people around you, you don't want to trash the earth. Even throwing trash on the ground
Absolutely.
is disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
That would violate the basis of the Ten Commandments, to be loving and respectful.
Yeah.
So Christians say, yes, we want to protect the environment as much as possible, but we're a little bit dubious that the world is going to end very soon because we don't have solar panels on our house. We think the world has another future. So what is coming according to the Bible is our question.
Yeah, and I have a follow-up to that too, is it seems like we are worshiping the creation rather than the creator.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a very dangerous thing to actually, yes, we need to take care of the earth and be good stewards. But in a lot of circles, though, the earth is put above God.
Or are we a little arrogant to think that we can control the weather?
Exactly. Yeah. So here's the question. What does the Bible say about the future of humanity and climate change?
Yeah. Well, I think we had some quotes there. We were looking at Luke 21, verse 25, and it says, there will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, on earth, distress of nations, and perplexity, the sea, the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear. In other words, there's something else coming in the future besides our failure to control automobiles. So it says, what else does it say? That for fear of those things coming upon the earth, for the powers of heaven will be shaken. Probably talking about sun, the moon, the stars there.
Yeah, the elements. Yeah.
It says, then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven, power and great glory. So we're looking, as Christians, we're looking at a different kind of end to the earth.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that even non-Christians are they're noticing that things are changing.
Yeah.
But they don't know the answer. And so, but the Bible is clear about, and we're told in prophecy, what is to happen, especially on the topic of global warming. Let's talk about that. What does the Bible say about global warming at the end of time?
Well, it does say that when Christ comes back, it mentions several times that there'll be fire. And as we get...
What is the reason for fire? Maybe we can unpack that a little bit.
Well, it does talk about earthquakes too.
Okay.
Revelation mentions it. Jesus mentions it. There'll be great earthquakes at the end. In Revelation, it says right at the end, there'll be earthquake, a great earthquake, which would bring about volcanic action. As the plates are moving, that's what the earthquake is all about. When the plates move, it opens up, and they get volcanic action and fire. You probably have massive waves hitting our coastlines. So there's a lot will happen, and that's why men's hearts are failing them for fear. They realize, hey, we don't have control of the climate. We don't have control of this earth.
And should we finish that quote?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So the Lord will come with fire and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury and his rebuke with flames of fire.
Mm-hmm.
For by fire and by his sword the Lord will judge all flesh, and the slain of the Lord shall be many. For I know their works and their thoughts. It shall be that I gather all nations and tongues, and they shall come and see my glory.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that fire is correlated with God's glory.
Yeah. And, all God has to do to fix the problems of earth, at least with people, is just show up. They can't live in his glory if they're not ready.
That's right.
To meet him. That's clear in Scripture. I was looking at 2 Peter 3. There it says, looking for the hastening of the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be dissolved, being on fire, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for a new heavens and a new earth in which dwelleth righteousness.
Amen. That is a great promise, isn't it? The new heavens, right?
Yeah. And then Revelation 21, it's interesting, it says, now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no more sea. It goes on to describe this new earth. And that's the climate change. That's the climate change we're looking for, right?
It's the ultimate climate change.
So we have global warming followed by a climate change.
I can't help but to think about the days of Noah and how God called his messenger to preach and to talk about that the world was going to be cleansed, in that case, by a purification of water.
Mm-hmm.
And we are, fast forward, at the end of time, also warned of the second coming of Christ. Those that are looking for his coming and expect him to come back. But we're just, as we just read in these quotes, it's not going to be secret. It's going to be worldwide, right?
Yes. And it's interesting. There was a cleansing by water. There will be a cleansing by fire.
Mm-hmm.
But the ones who survived will be cleansed by the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
A different fire. Time of the apostles, the tongues of fire coming down, resting upon them in Acts chapter 2. Those who are cleansed by the Holy Spirit, that's the cleansing we want to look forward to. There's another one in Isaiah 30.
Did you want me to read that?
Yeah.
Okay. This is in Isaiah 30, 26. It says, moreover, the light of the moon will be as the light of the sun, and the light of the sun will be sevenfold, as the light of 7 days, in the day that the Lord binds up the bruise of his people, and heals the stroke of their wound.
Everything's going to be different. And possibly there'll be protection from that sun. But if you go back in Scripture, it says that there were waters above and waters below, and they were separated at the time of creation, and that would change a lot of things. It would also bring refraction in at the poles and change the direction of light coming in to equalize the temperature around the Earth. That's why you found the forests down in the Antarctic and the lions up in Alaska,
Mm-hmm.
and possibly a little bit of greenhouse effect combined with all of this water up there that will probably reflect some of the sun's heat out into the atmosphere. Just a totally different environment.
Yeah. We get so caught up in this world, and I kind of feel we have rose-colored glasses on because you can get so caught up, and we are to be reminded that this world is not our home.
Yeah.
And all it takes is a look underneath things, and you can see that the world is ripe. it's ripe for Jesus to come home, to take his remnant home.
Right. I think that we have to concentrate on the world ending in a different way than what people are saying. And I'm looking forward to it. See, their hearts are failing them for fear because they say, man, we could have an asteroid strike the earth again. We could all be killed by this or that. And yet we're looking forward and saying, hey, what the Bible promises is great. There'll be no more killing, stealing, lying, cheating, and all of the cruel things that people do to one another. It's all going to end. Yeah, and I read Revelation 21 there said, and he carried me in a spirit to this great high mountain and showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. As he's prepared a complete new city, a new world. In Zechariah it says that his feet come down and touch the Mount of Olives. It makes this great plain. And then this holy city would rest down there. There'll be changes in the atmosphere totally. Climate change.
Climate change, yep. No more sin, no more suffering.
Yeah.
I like this back in the Old Testament here with Isaiah. I'll just read the first part of Isaiah 65:17. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered or come to mind.
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, we won't even remember all the problems, and definitely won't be worried about global warming. Well, I think our time's about up, so we want to thank everybody for listening in, for coming in on a discussion today, talking about the changes that we're expecting in the world, what the Bible says about it, and the way Christians look at the problem of climate change. Thanks for being with us.